My pleasure is to introduce Bob Brunetti. I read an article in the Wynyard History Society's newsletter, which is an excellent newsletter, and I do recommend any of you to join the society and read their newsletters because there's a lot in it. And there was something about Bob. And so that led me to think, what a good idea to ask Bob to come to us and talk to us about the history of post offices. And here he is. Over to you.
If anyone has questions, please do the same and I'll bring you the mic.
Thank you very much. It's very nice to be here with you all this morning. Ancient Persians and scrolls, Chinese, the Great Wall of China, the Indian smoke signals, the Pony Express in America, the stagecoach, pigeons, tin can deliveries, steamers, trains, biplanes, the post horn, riverboats, messengers, couriers, flags and lights on ships. Put these on, I suppose. The PMG department in Australia handled mail, radio, the text, and all of those things I've just mentioned to you are now radio, radar, mail, courier, whatever. And the ancient, the Chinese used to, on the Great Wall of China, they would send for 7,000 kilometres, they'd send their men, various men, with messages. And the Egyptians and the Romans would have chariots, special chariots, where they'd deliver various mails. So that was the story on those there. Do that, fine, all right. Done, put it around the neck. Now, a little bit of history here. In 1840, Sir Rowland Hill in Great Britain, he organised the postal system as we know it today and invented the stamp. And all those things I mentioned before, it was all willy-nilly how things were organised. And in Europe, they had the stagecoach, and they had the old, a man on a horse would go around to everybody's house, and he would blow the old post horn. And so then people would know that they'd have their mail. And this is just a model of the post horn that they used to have, that used to carry around on their horse. So the horse would pop up to your place, the horn would blow, you'd come out, you'd know there was some mail. That was just one format they had. But Rowland Hill, as I mentioned, he organised everything so that it was more organised. And then after he'd organised this in England, he organised post offices and delivery systems. And in 1949, the UPU, Universal Postal Union, was formed, so that formulated what Rowland Hill had done in England, did all around the world, so that various companies or countries could then have a standardised mail system. And it seemed to work out fairly well in the time. For example, in America, the Pony Express went from one side of America to another. It had a man riding a horse. They used to change stages all the time, and it would go right across America. We've now got courier systems that do the same sort of thing. Now, Great Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Germany, and the Netherlands, and Belgium, they all had overseas territories. And once this organised mail system was done, they all followed the system, and then the mail system came through all their territories all around the place. Now, for example, people think, oh yes, well that relates to Europe, not to around our area, around Australia and the Pacific. But for example, in our area here, GB, or Great Britain, had Papua, Fiji, the Gilbert and Ellice Islands. That was their territories. France had New Caledonia, Spain had the Philippines, Portugal had Timor, Germany had New Guinea, the Marshall Islands and Samoa, and the Netherlands had Indonesia. So having all those territories around Australia, we were very, very lucky because they used to extend through. So we then also had postal services that connected to all those various areas. The steamers and the mail picket vessels moved large volumes of correspondence on a regular basis. And as I mentioned, 5 of the 7 nations had territories around here. And then once the aircraft became more reliable, they were then used to distribute the mail all over the globe. And that included our 6 colonies, as Australia was at the time. And it was quite interesting. Australia was lucky because we were in a position, aside from our, as I mentioned, all those nations that had territories, we were also the Imperial Airways from England. They had the route, the airmail route with flying boats down to Australia, landing at Sydney at Rose Bay. So we also had all the European mail. This is a much later stage, of course, and Pan American Airways came from America. They came down through Hawaii, Samoa, New Zealand, and into Australia. So Australia was a sort of a conduit for all the countries of the world. It's quite amazing, and basically in Sydney. So Sydney was a very, very busy place. Now, we're still doing a little bit of Australia here, but of course during World War II, remember the PMG department, which was formed in Australia, handled all the correspondence as well as all the telecommunications work, such as telegrams and all that sort of thing. So during World War II, the PMG department in Australia was very important. It coordinated all the wartime efforts all around the Pacific, which was quite a thing. Now, there's just three things I want to mention here, and you'll see as I go through, you'll see why I mention them. There are three things that are affecting mail in Australia currently, and you'll see. I'll explain them to you. In Denmark, as from the 31st of December last year, they wiped their post office. There's no more post office, gone. It's all now handled by a private courier system. So if you want to send something to Denmark, a private courier will deliver it at the other end. In Ireland, no more stamps. You go to the post office now and you get a little sticker that goes on your letter. And in Canada, local post boxes in each suburb. The mailman doesn't come to you anymore. There might be one suburb, say for example here, Somerset, they might say, right, everyone in Somerset's going to have a private post box at the post office. You go and pick up your own mail. And now I can assure you Australia Post are looking at all three of those as well to try and, so down the line, don't be surprised if you have some of them. Now, if we go on a little bit now, so that was a bit about the world. We'll go on now to the 6 colonies that made up Australia. They all had separate postal systems and different charges. If you wanted to send mail from one to another, it would cost you quite a lot of money. A penny, 4pence, halfpenny, 6pence, whatever, depending what it was. Now, some of the large companies, particularly insurance companies that had branches in each colony, were very shrewd. They'd find the cheapest place where they could send their mail to the other colonies, and they'd have all their mail sent from that one colony to all the other colonies. It saved a fortune. But what's happening, a lot of the colonies also charge tax on the mail, so that became quite an expensive exercise as well. Delivery times in Western Australia, which is one of the territories, and the outback were not regular. And until the Federation, when West Australia said, right, we want a train to join your federation, which they did, postal wasn't very regular. It was done by shipping, and it took quite a lot of time for the Eastern mail to get across to West Australia. And Queensland mail was also, North Queensland was delivered by irregular shipping schedules all the time. Distance, of course, and weather were a hindrance, as much as the mail, in fact, was never delivered. The postman crossed the river, it was flooded, he fell off the horse, drowned, the mail didn't get delivered. So they estimate, or other things could happen, the poor postman, but they estimate that up to 40% of mail was never delivered back in those days. But now, Tassie, we were fortunate because we had regular shipping services and we had a rail service which covered the whole state to a much greater extent than it does at present. Now, Chris brought a map today, which I hadn't seen before, and it lists all the post offices on the rail lines and everything, so it's quite an interesting thing. So thanks, Chris, that was very interesting. You'll find there, with trains, it was very interesting. You could go from Queenstown to Hobart with 3 different train services, TGR, EBR and Mount Lyell. And of course they used to carry all the mail as well. So Tassie had a very extensive mail system, as you'll see from that. Now, I'll just, you'll find that a lot of the rail stations also had post offices, and the station master was also the postmaster. He got paid from TGR to be a station master, and he got paid from the PMG department in Australia to be the postmaster. So some postmasters were sort of a little bit of money in the pocket. They were quite good. If I can just go back to cover a little bit about Australia for a start. Now, Australia Post makes money, and it pays a dividend to the federal government every year. It's divided into 2 postal systems: the postal system itself for mail, and the courier system. Now, the postal system makes a huge loss every year, and that's our fault. No one else but our fault. And the reason it's yours and my fault is because we don't post letters, We don't post Christmas cards. And all our bills that we get are by the computer, and we do direct debits back again. So none of us use the mail anymore. That's the reason costs go up all the time. That's the reason we're charged $1.70 at the moment, and Australia Post have just applied for $1.85, which they'll get approved next month. And they do every 6 months, they have a price rise, and I can guarantee the next rise will be $2. The more they put the cost up, the less the service is used. So therefore, as I said, like in Denmark, Australia Post are watching very, very carefully what's happening, and I'm sure within 10 years, I'm not a betting man, but if I was, I'd say within be done by couriers. The difficulty with couriers, of course, is that they won't go out whoop whoop. They'll only service the main places, and whoop whoop, if you want to send a letter to Cooper Pedy or something, it'll cost you $10, $15. That's very unfortunate. As I said, in the past years, the post office was always the centre of the community social activity. There weren't any telephones, so everybody went to pick up their mail at the railway station or whatever. And it was a good social gathering. They all got together, mums and dads got together, and they had a chat. And everything was organised from there. The locals met on mail days, and they organised a lot of social events. In the 1950s and 60s, of course, cars replaced a cart and the art of walking. And so many little country stores closed, and so people could go to the larger centres. Thus, the post offices shut in the small centres. People began to have home telephones. Farms had less employees, so the local population ran down. Less mail, and people didn't have to go to the post office to use the phone. They had one at home. Such things as you know, local football clubs, halls, all became a thing of the past, and it also spelt the end of many small post offices. Now, over the years, many small towns have vanished, and the local post offices closed accordingly. It was a great pity, as in Tasmania, many generations of men and women and their families had manned the postal system for over 100 years. It just went from family to family to family. And it was funny, I mentioned the railway stations had post offices. Further out in the rural areas, the post offices were run from people's homes. They had a dedicated room, and the farmer, mainly in rural areas for farmers, the farmer was out working all day. His wife ran the post office, and everybody went into it, and they gained a little bit of extra income from there. It's interesting that there are 6 different styles of post offices, and I'll just run through them roughly for you in Australia. There's the official post offices, the ones that are staffed by the PMG, and they offer full services, such as Wynyard here. There are semi-post offices where there's only, still run by the post office, but only one person runs it, and sometimes they shut at lunchtime. Then we've got what's called the allowance post offices. They're now called a licensed post office. They're all around the countryside. They're normally in a dwelling or a private premises, and allowance is given to the owner depending on the amount of services that they run on those services. That's becoming less and less now. Australia Post, in their wisdom, have decided that they will shut down post offices everywhere, and when a licensed post office from a shop comes up for purchase, if you want to buy it, you don't buy the post office section. Australia Post buy that back, and they take it away. They're trying to get people to go back to the main post offices because no one uses them, so there's method in the madness there. There's what's called a receiving house. That's where services are very minimal, and there was a fixed allowance received, not on the amount of mail, they were just paid so much. They were in small rural areas. And there were places that had a telegraph or telephone only, and that's all they offered, no other services at all. And there was the free bag service. The free bag service is one that Lake Margaret was one. There was no need for a post office, but what happened was the main post office, Queenstown at that time, they had a locked bag which they sent to Mount Lyell, and the station superintendent at the power station opened it and put it into the various pigeon holes for the people who lived at Lake Margaret. So that was the style of thing that was happening there. Upon Federation in 1907, all the postal services of the 6 colonies, they were all amalgamated, and that's when the PMG department was formed. New stamps were issued, but as each state had its own stamps before, mainly side-faced with Queen Victoria, they could be used until the supply was exhausted. So you'll see some Tasmanian stamps with Victorian and New South Wales postmarks on them. They're quite legal because they used to send all the post to each state till they were all used. And when the Federation came along, we had the kangaroo set of stamps. It was a set of stamps which had the kangaroo on, based on a map of Australia. They started at the halfpenny, went up to a £2. Now the £2 mint, a used £2 mint stamp now, for collectors, selling for $12,000. A lot of money, but because remember the £2 was overseas mail, it came on parcels, brown paper with a string. By the time it got to the other end, the stamp was all crushed and damaged, so it was no good. So that's why they're so much. For example, in Tasmania, they had their own stamp system as well, and Tasmania was the first state in the colony to have its own pictorial stamps, not the side-face Queen Victoria. And when they first came out, oh, woe behold, it was unpatriotic. You didn't have the Queen on it. You were terrible people. But they became very, very popular. And I personally, as a stamp collector, I collect postmarked stamps from each one of the post offices here in Tasmania. One I don't have is Tipekana penny overprint stamp. One just sold recently for $7,000. There are only 37 known copies of that stamp because that place shut, and everybody then, the rail line, that's where the rail line finished from Mount Lyell. Then it continued on to Strawn, so that just died, that little area just there. So after Federation, all postal and telegraph services in Australia were run by the PMG department. In 1978, Australia decided that it would separate the postmaster, or the PMG, into Australia Post and to Telecom, as it was, which is now Telstra. And they issued a stamp in 1978. I'll just pass this around. You might like to pass that round, and it'll eventually get back to me. Another thing that's happening, all post offices in Australia, Wynyard was a good example. Wynyard had a large mail distribution centre. And but what Australia Post have done now is there's no mail sorted at post offices. It's all done now in mail centres. There's one here of Launceston, and there's one at Burnie and Ulverston, which you can just pass those ones around as well. And the idea of that is all the mail goes to the central. It's less staff at the post office, and the postie picks up all his mail now from a mail centre and then just distributes it wherever. If there's too much mail, a bag will go to the nearest post office, and the postie will just call into the post office to get his mail. It's interesting over the years. I'll just pass a few things through. The uniforms that postal people used to have when the post office first started off in Australia, you'd be amazed at the various post offices. Now, we all know the little post boxes that are around the countryside. Australia Post, you'll see fewer and fewer of those. Australia Post are pulling them all out now, and so there won't be any of those soon. But mailboxes and pillar boxes were quite the big thing. I've got some more just to pass around here. In North Hobart, the post office there, the old post office pillar box they used to have to post your mail, the people who own which is now a coffee shop, the old post office, they've kept the old pillar box, and it's still used locally. And in Charles Street in Launceston, Australia Post have actually kept one of the old pillar boxes that we used to have. That's the only one left in Tasmania. They've taken all the others away. The old pillar boxes were quite an amazing thing. What you saw above ground, 50% of it was below ground. And the reason it was because people used to send cash and money orders in their envelopes those days. So as today people in their four-wheel drives rip an ATM out of a wall, in the olden days with the horse and cart, they used to rip the pillboxes out and take them home. So that's why they're that large. There's a little picture here of some of the different pillar boxes, and this is the one that we know today, the normal one, plus the express post. Now, mail around Australia was carted in various ways, and it used to have the old Cobb & Co stagecoach. Cobb & Co operated in New Zealand and every territory in Australia except Tasmania. Tasmania had 3 stagecoach companies. They operated the run from Hobart to Launceston, and they normally used to overnight in Tunbridge or Ross. And in fact, there's an old picture, it hasn't come out very well, but one of the old stagecoaches from Hobart to Ross is still preserved in Tunbridge, and you'll see it on the back of this one when you get it. They used to have mail carts. There's a picture here of the old Port Surrell mail cart, which used to do the East Coast run, an old Ford, and it was certainly loaded up quite a lot. Now, a lot of buses and trams in Sydney, Melbourne, on the back of them they had a mailbox. Because the trams and buses went to all the suburbs, instead of having a little mailbox in the ground, on the back of the tram or the bus there was a box where you'd put your mail in, and the tram or the bus would stop at the post office, the GPO, and drop the mail off to the people. It was one way of getting it round. And there's pictures here of little old trucks and things that we've got, and I've got one of these pockets here somewhere. I carry things in my pockets, it's quite surprising, but a model of one. This is P&G department, one of the old Ford trucks they used to have that they used to cart around the place. And I've got this other pocket here, something in this pocket. We carry one of the old mailboxes. It's amazing what I carry in my pockets. And now the various sorts of things. Now we're getting into time now. We're in Tassie even. Some of you will remember some of these things. The Australia Post used to have little Peugeot three-wheel motorcycle vans they used to take around. Then they had the mini mokes at one stage, and now they've got the three-wheeler motorcycles and the big courier vans, which you'll see all around the countryside. So let's see how we're going. Now, at one stage in Tasmania, there were 703 post offices. And people say, oh, that's a lot of post offices. But remember, a lot of those post offices were only there for a short time. As mines opened and shut, they came and went. Some post offices were only there for 2 or 3 months. Some were there for 100 years. It just depends. There is a book listing all the post offices and when they opened and when they shut. So it's quite an interesting piece of memorabilia. So if any of you want to read it, you're quite welcome to. As I mentioned before, now stamps. Stamps were invented by Sir Rowland Hill, and he invented the first stamp was a stamp called the penny black. You've probably heard of the penny black. And people think it's worth a lot of money. It's not. The tuppence blue, which was issued at the same, but it was in blue, was worth more than the penny black because it was from England to Europe. And eventually the penny black, they had to change the colour of the stamp to magenta because when you put a black postmark on a black stamp, you could keep reusing the stamp, which people did. So they were quite... the rarest stamp in the world is a British Guiana stamp. It's a 1 cent magenta. There's only one copy known to exist. They ran out of stamps in British Guiana, so the local postmaster got the local printer to print some stamps, which he did. The latest auction sold, that one stamp sold in America for $200 million American. It's done as an investment, of course, but it has sold for up to $400 million. But stamp collecting is on its way down, so it's becoming less and less. So that's what the story with that one. Now in Australia, stamps are what's called non-denominated, which means that, take example, decimal currency started in 1966, and any Australian stamps you can still keep using. In overseas countries, after 10 years, they denominate the stamp, so you can't use it anymore. Now, I'm facilitator for our stamp club in Burnie. We've got 61 members, and 11 of those members won't or don't use or have a computer, and so I have to send them out a hard copy, and so I do. And 11 people, I normally use about 70 stamps. So I don't use the common one. I've got stacks of 1 cent, 2 cent, 10 cents, all the different ones. And there's one gentleman in Devonport who's a dealer, a stamp dealer, and he hates doing it. He thinks that you should use the current stamps because Australia Post will go broke, which they are anyway. So I have much pleasure whenever I send him here in an A4 envelope, 1 and 2 cent stamps, both sides. And he's not impressed, but that's the way it goes. There are various sorts of stamps. There are what's called, or Australia Post did trial what was called some counter-printed stamps. Now, counter-printed stamps it was the one design. You went to the post office, whether you sent a letter at 37 cents or $2.50, you got the same stamp, and it was just printed out with the value on it. That wasn't very successful. And they tried with Advance Bank in Sydney and Melbourne through their ATMs to issue stamps as well, and they're little triangular stamps. They only lasted for about 18 months, and those are now quite a collector's item on those as well. As I said, Australia Post do try everything to get people to use the mail. The 65 cent rate for Christmas cards, they've been going now for about 10 years, and it still won't influence people to send Christmas cards. So they'll stop that one eventually. So I've got through a few things here. From time to time, Australia put out various stamps, and they, in 1978, I think it was, they put out a historical set of old post offices, and included in that is the Launceston Post Office, was one of them they put in it, which is an old historical post office. And they also put out stamps, the 200th anniversary of Australia Post. So I'll pass these around, and you can just have a look at those as well. Just a short note here on stamp collectors. Stamp collectors, or philately as it's known, millions of adherents all around the world, and you can bring history, geology, geography, photography, scenic appreciation, monetary values, personalities, and much more to a collector. You learn all those things off a stamp. I mean, my wife, when she was alive, she used to say to me, "What do you collect those little bits of paper with pictures on for?" And I said, well, you know, you learn a lot of things. President Roosevelt, King Edward VI, the old King of England, Egypt, Churchill, they all collected stamps. And in fact, the biggest and best stamp collection in the world at the moment is owned by the royal family in England. It's lodged, of course, as part of the English heritage, but they have nearly every stamp that's issued in the world just automatically sends them a copy of the stamp. So their collection is huge, and they have a staff of 20 who are looking around that after that all the time. And we've got a stamp club in Burnie, that's my club, and we go from there. A lot of people, when they collect stamps, collect them from the various countries, but a lot collect what's called thematics. That's when you collect a topic on stamps. It might be dinosaurs, it might be aircraft, it might be butterflies, and a lot of people do that as well. Now, Australia Post, in Australia, when a stamp's issued, they also have a first aid cover. And the first aid cover has a copy of the stamp with a print on it with a special date when the stamp's issued. No one collects those anymore, and they're not worth anything. But once in a while, illegally, some of the post offices that have been closed, Australia Post have closed on the people and they don't like them, they have a special postmark done, and they call it the last day of issue. Now, I'll pass this around here. There's one here from Barrington, which closed in 2001, and the lady got herself, the postmistress got herself in a lot of trouble. But all around Australia, they sent last day of cover envelopes, and they're quite a collector's thing. So, yes? Sorry. Now, we've travelled the world. We've travelled lots of places, but let's go to, we've got a bit of time left, so we've ended up back in Tasmania. Now, the first official mails in Tassie were in 1803, and that was to Risen Cove in Hobart and Port Dalrymple in the north. They were both military posts, and that was military official mail from New South Wales. And the first postmaster of Van Diemen's Land was a man called John Beaumont. He was a 23-year-old, and he was a former Lieutenant Governor's secretary, so it was jobs for the boys. And the first post office was built in Macquarie Street in Hobart in 1816, and it was run by James Mitchell. He was the postmaster from that post office, and he was a former criminal from Norfolk Island. He came through to Hobart. By 1823, the mail system was becoming quite established, and through the Derwent Valley and up to New Norfolk. And as you can see from the map, the post office will follow wherever the railways were. In 1825, the mail between the north and south, Hobart and Launceston, was actually carried by donkeys, not horses, but donkey mail. It was called mule mail, horses later on, but it was a 19-hour trip. And the man used to take it, there were two of them, and they'd take it, that was a non-stop service. Come 1830, the suburban mail started in Hobart and Launceston, and it was a charge of a penny. But if it was further than 10 miles, it was a charge of threepence. And a mail cart was also started at the time, and between north and south, not the mules, but actually a mail cart. And there were then 35 post offices in Tasmania. That was in 1830. In 1835, we complained about the cost of our mail here. But in 1835, the penny went up to tuppence, and everyone creamed, 100% increase. But that's the way that the system went. Now also, at that stage, the newspapers in Hobart were spread all around the state, and they had a special newspaper stamp issued that was put on the put on the newspapers, and they were delivered by the PMG department as well. In 1840, that was quite a good time for the post office here in Tasmania. It was the first armed robbery of a mail cart, and it was money at that time was transferred between the banks. It was done by the PMG as well, and that was in the East Coast. A further 5 years later, a two-day stagecoach service began between north and south, and as I said, they stopped at Tunbridge on that one there. International services followed in earnest in the following years, particularly as the colonies all had men in the Crimean and the Boer Wars, so service was irregular due to shipping schedules. In 1877, the night train between Launceston and Hobart started, and it was they attached a mail van to it, and the mail was sorted out in the van when it got to the various places. And as the rail extended, that service was eventually extended through to Burnie. And they had about 8 men on it, and they sorted all the mail, and they picked up and dropped off on the way as well. I mentioned those pictorial Tasmanian stamps. They were issued in 1899. They went for about 5-6 years, and they were scenic views of Tasmania, very, very popular with everyone, and still very, very popular with collectors. Now, over the years, Tasmania also had its own telegraph system, but of course the telegraph lines followed the railway lines, so that's where the telegraph offices were there as well. And as I mentioned, there are post offices which were telegraph offices only, on that one there. Now, if we get through, I mentioned there were 703 post offices, and many of the post offices were based at railway sidings or at the station. And in the other areas, you probably recall the old blue post office signs. They used to have it bashed onto the side of houses, and that's how people knew where the local post office was. And they'd go into the person's house, into the dedicated room, and they would see what was going on. Now, what have we got here? As I mentioned there about Australia Post pulling out various services. All mail in Tasmania is now centralised in Hobart, at the Hobart Mail Centre. That's why you put postcodes on. It all goes through a computer, and it gets stamped. If you put too many stamps on, you'll find that the computer doesn't generate them, and you can reuse the stamps if they come back to you. But once, if you went to the local post here at Wynyard and posted a letter to your friend at Wynyard, if the postie got it early enough in the morning, the postman could deliver it to you that afternoon. Now it all has to go via Hobart. And I've known cases in Somerset. I've posted a letter in Somerset, and it's taken me 10 days to get it back to me. I've done it so the system just doesn't seem to be working. Australia Post are trialling all their post offices to get back to use the main post offices again. They were like a junk shop, department store. You could buy lollies, toys, everything in them, as you probably knew. And they're getting rid of that. And Burnie was the first place in Australia where they trialled the new style post office. And 12 months ago, they did the Burnie post office up, and that's since then that model has been followed all around Australia. And they issued a separate set of stamps solely for Burnie. I'm just going to have a look at those. I'll pass those around. They're worth quite a bit of money on those ones there now. So now, if we come a little bit further, now we've travelled around Australia a bit. Now we're on Tasmania, and now we've ended up at Wynyard. So Wynyard is the Wynyard post office here was quite a good post office, quite a busy post office. The rail line finished at Wynyard at one stage, and then it continued on down south. But at Wynyard, at the post office, before they had mail centres, they sorted out everything here at Wynyard. For the circular head, for the Prelina line, there was a railway line up to Prelina that was sorted here. Everything was sorted at Wynyard. It was a very, very busy mail centre. That's all gone now, of course. Now, just one or two rarities which we've got here, Tasmania rarities. Lake Margaret. I mentioned Lake Margaret before about having a free bag service from Queenstown. That was one oddity that we had in Tasmania. The Australian and Antarctic Territory issues its own stamps, and all the first aid covers for Australian and Antarctic Territory are stamped in Kingston. And they're stamped in Kingston because that's where the CSIRO have the Antarctic Centre. And it's become quite good. And there are there's four Antarctic centres, 3 on Antarctic itself and 1 on Macquarie Island. Well, Macquarie Island's unique. The Antarctic Centre Commonwealth run the 3 post offices at the various centres on Antarctica. Macquarie Island is run by the Tasmanian Post Office, because Macquarie Island's part of Tasmania, and they actually have a postal clerk based on Macquarie Island, and goodness knows what the clerk does, but there's not a lot of mail there from there. King Island is a unique area. At one stage, King Island, after the soldier settlements, First and Second World War, it had 11 post offices on King Island. Now, I went to King Island for 16 years every month in my job, and goodness knows what they did with them all, but they've now combined, and there's now only one in Curry. But at a small island, it had a maximum population of 4,000 people. To have 11 post offices was quite... We had a post office museum based in Hobart, and all the paraphernalia from around Australia was based in Hobart. It was a fabulous museum, but Australia Post decided they'd shut it down, which they did, and they gave all this stuff all around Australia. It's now locked up in Canberra and Melbourne, so all the old historical records, they're gone. Ridgeway in Hobart is on the side of Mount Wellington. During the 87? During the bushfires, 67 bushfires, the post office burnt down. And the postmistress, there was a Catholic, there was a Catholic church next to her, but she was also very involved with St Virgil's College in Hobart. And St Virgil's College had an old Ford van which they used to cart the boys around in. So they gave it to her, and it became Tasmania's first mobile post office on wheels. And you don't often see photos of it, but there it is on the back. So I'll pass that one around. And that was used for about 8 years until she rebuilt her house. Kelso, up on the East Tamar Highway, East Tamar, it didn't have a road going to Kelso at one stage, so the post office was serviced by ferry from Georgetown. It used to come across the river by ferry. Now, the one that I've mentioned Lake Margaret, but the one that you probably have heard about is the post office tree. Up at Cradle Mountain, there is a tree up there where there was a gum tree, stringy bark, that had a big hole in it, and all the local people used to leave their mail there. There's an unofficial post office for all their friends to pick up their mail and parcels. And eventually the postmaster, it became an unofficial post office. He used to pick it up and he used to drop things off there as well. I've got a photo of it here, and it's still there. You can still see it as you go past if you're going up round that way. So that's our time starting to run short. But I've just got 2 or 3 more. I mentioned we go into Wynyard. So what I've done in Wynyard here, our club is, I mentioned there's 703 post offices. We've got a project where we are getting photos of all the post offices in the area, and which is what we've done so far. Of the 703, we've got 296 of them. Some of them we'll never get because they're very old post offices. But I've got some old. I'll just pass these around to you just for your own interest. The Waratah post office was the old post office there, and the new one is now in the council chambers. Magnet down behind Wynyard. There was a post office down there. There it is there. Unusual place, Magnet, because when the mine closed down just before the Second World War, it was the first place in Australia where they sold the whole township. These days, the mines, they sell it all, but they sold the whole township, and they had a mammoth sale, so it went. Here in the Wynyard municipality, Waratah Wynyard municipality, there's also a post office at Lewina, Parawee, on the other side of the gorge. There was a little a mining area there, so there was a post office there. Then we've got something called Allen's Railway. Boat Harbour Siding, just near Boat Harbour Siding, there was a little railway at Siding, and there was a post office actually at Allen's Railway. That's a very, very unique one. At Boat Harbour, I've got a picture here of Boat Harbour 100 years ago. The one that's currently there at the moment has a horse and cart in front of it, and that's this one here. So I'll just pass that one through, and you can have a look at these. There's a whole lot of the old photos here. A good one, it was the Guildford Junction railway station. Now, that was the post office as well. Very busy railway station because the road didn't go through to the west coast. Up till 1963, you put your car or your bus or whatever on the train, took it down to Rosebery and got off again, and vice versa. So Guildford Junction was busy. Tourists used to send all the letters from the post office. So the postmaster got good money from EBR, from being the station master. He got good money from the PMG department for being the station, for being the postmaster. And his wife and daughter, they ran the cafe that was there as well, the little tea shop. So, but the family ran the Guildford Junction railway station. There's a picture of it here in the Emu Bay Railway colours, which were the blues. So, how are we going for time there? Right, that's all right. So I've just got one or two more little post offices here. There's one here at NAL-ABA, Lanaba. Now, that's here. That's the photo of the school. Now, where the heck is that? It's 4 kilometres from Tacone. And they said, well, why call the road? So why is there a little post office there if it's only so close? 100 years ago, you walked everywhere, or you went on the horse, and you had your social occasion. That's why the post offices were so close to each other. Here in the Waratah Wynyard municipality, you've got Wynyard, you've got Somerset, you've got Boat Harbour, and Yolla. You've got 4 post offices. That's all in this municipality now. There used to be 47. And in the little area just behind us here, Calder, Aldina, all those places there were 23 post offices just in an area. And solely because it was a rural area. And remember, in those days, the farm had 2 or 3 employees. There was mum and dad, so there was a use for a post office. They didn't have telephones, so people went to the post office for the telephone. And if they wanted to send telegrams, they were done as well. Great. Yes. Yep. No, there's still a bit of that around, but, which is good, and that's handy. But it's an interesting topic. We find all. Now I've got 1 or 2 others here. There's one at Elliot, the old Elliot store. That's now just a house. A lot of them are converted to houses. There's one I only found out the other day at Seabrook. Now we know the Somerset post office is. And you probably, as you all come to Wynyard to Burnie regularly, you'll see the water treatment plant there at just before you get into Somerset on the road on the weather side. There was a railway siding just on the side of the road there at Seabrook, and there was a post office there at Seabrook. And I didn't know that myself, that one. I only picked that one up last week. So I'll send this around. Now, I mentioned telegraph offices. Up at the back at Muna, there was a soldier settlement up there. And but of course that's all now pine trees, all grown up there. But that was what we call a TO. That was a telegraph only office. As I mentioned before, it only had a telegraph system on it up there. And we've got Calder. I mentioned Parawee. So there's photos of all of the old places here. Yolla is another interesting one. As you mentioned the chemist. There's the chemist at Yolla. But there's the first post office in 1930 at Yolla. That's the old one there. Flowerdale. Now, Flowerdale was I'll send this one. I'll just get this one. In 1911, there was the post office in Flowerdale, and there was also again. Right. It was a busy little centre, Flowerdale, that bit, and the Flowerdale post. The Flowerdale siding, and that was the railway siding. The train there went off down to Circular Head, or it went up to Prialina. So you can see the post office was quite busy there as they were sending everything up through. It's Henry.
Well, this photograph of Seabrook's actually over at Lona between Penguin and Old.
That one, is it? Yeah. Well, there you go. I've learned something to do there again.
Oh, yeah. It's nowhere near.
We'll get that changed. Well, in the official Australia Post book, that's where it is. Oh, right.
I can't think of the road name, but it's just
yeah, it looks like it too. Yep, it looks like it too. And 3 sisters in the back. Yeah, yep. We will get that one corrected. So as you can see, there's a lot of various post offices all around the place. There was something unique here in Tasmania. So I've got a picture here of I mentioned the pictorial stamps from Tasmania. Here they are here. Now, in Hobart, Wilkinson's Pharmacy decided that it sent so many accounts out to people with all their drug prescriptions, it would do their own stamps. So it produced its own stamps. Wilkinson's chemist, it was quite illegal. They didn't get any authority from the post office. There have been only about 5 or 6 of them are found, that stamp. Probably in somebody one day will pick up a shoebox and find a whole lot more of them. The one sold in Melbourne just recently for $5,000. That's the sort of thing that. So there is money in stamps, but now the 3 main post offices in Tasmania, of course, are Hobart, Burnie, and the GPO in Hobart, Launceston. Launceston is just a little history here. It was funny when they built the Launceston post office in 1855, as it is now. They had a clock tower and everything, but they had no clock in it because the PMG department decided that was too expensive. They didn't need a clock. So the local populace had a run around and they got the money and they put the clock in the clock tower. That's that one there. So that's a little bit about all about that. What I'd like to do is, time's nearly up, I'd just like to read you something, as Danny had something to read as well, and this one got me intrigued when I picked this one up. I'm the greatest traveller in the world. I have travelled from north to south, through every latitude and longitude, on sledges, camels' backs, horseback, by all kinds of transport, on sea, on land and by air, even in submarines, airships and space rockets. I am also the largest art gallery in the world. Here you will find heroes and heroines from mythology, and I can show you famous or obscure people in history, kings and queens, pharaohs and presidents, princes and princesses, poets and patriots, emperors and explorers, athletes, architects, aviators, artists and adventurers, tribal chiefs, inventors, musicians and martyrs, dramatists and novelists, shahs, sultans, saints and sinners. You can also see the fabulous images of the phoenix, the unicorn, dragons and centaurs. I am the largest art museum in the world, and at the same time the best miniature encyclopedia. I can show you hamlets, towns, countries and continents, or take you to the remotest places on earth. I depict mountains and valleys, oceans, rivers, lakes, waterfalls, geysers, harbours, bridges and dams, primitive canoes, ships and modern transatlantic liners, monuments and statues, castles, cathedrals, churches, mosques, temples and ruins, as well as all kinds of transport from the motor car to the dirigible, from the steamboat to the space rocket. I cover all types of sport, occupations, customs, sacred rites and ceremonies, and nearly every kind of bird, animal, fish, fruit and flower. I show the horrors of war, the blessings of peace, the rigours of immigration and afflictions of poverty and the scourge of hunger. I can illustrate the adventure of Don Quixote, fairy tales and legends from every civilization. I bring to you symbols of our art and culture, industries, natural resources, commerce, agriculture and architecture, and all mankind's struggles. I commemorate expeditions and voyages, discoveries and inventions which have made my life worth living. Millions of men, women and children stand enthralled before me. They find pleasure, relaxation and enchantment in my infinite variety. What am I? I am the humble postage stamp. So thank you very much for your time, and if there's any questions, please ask.
Thank you, Bob, for taking us around the world. Does anybody have any questions? Hang on, I'll bring that to you.
Mine's not a question, it's more of a information thing. There's a fellow in Melbourne that's going around restoring those pillowboxes. He's done about 200, I think. He said he's got 200 more to do. He's a real theatrical man, so he dresses up in period costume while he's doing it. There's an article on ABC or something recent about it. The second one was the Somerset Post Office. Is it a franchise or what is it?
The Somerset Post Office, you asked it. The Somerset Post Office is a franchise post office. The last postmaster there was Matthew Costello, and he was also postmaster at Zeehan, Strahan and Rosebery. And you're just a licensed post office now here. In Tasmania, there's close on 80 licensed post offices, and a lot of the regional areas are now as licensed post offices. But as I said before, Australia, if that post office was sold now, they would have their licence taken away from them, and Australia Post would probably shut the post office and say to the Somerset people, go to Burnie, go to Wynyard. In Hobart, for example, they've got a post office. They had a post office in North Hobart, Moona and Glenorchy, and they're all fair away from each other. They've just told everybody that they're closing all three and opening one, and that's what's happening even in large places.
Congratulations on managing to get through the talk without mentioning email once. But I'm a huge fan of email. But going back to the days we've been talking about, or you've been talking about, that had one enormous advantage. If you wrote a letter, it was a long time before you got a reply. And that reply you didn't have to reply to again for a fair time. Nowadays, if someone sends an email, you feel you've got to reply instantly. Then they reply instantly, and you reply instantly. Yeah, those were the big advantages, I reckon.
Well, another advantage is, of course, if you got a bill and didn't want to pay it for a while, it took 3 or 4 months before you got another bill, so you could hold off. Just one last thing I mentioned, we all know about Postman's Track down here at the National Park down here. That was called that because a man used to walk from Cape Groom, the VDL company, all the way to Launceston on a regular basis, and he went along the Postman's Track. So that's where the name came from. It was all in the Wynyard Circular Head municipality. I remember I was a councillor here in Wynyard, and we conned Circular Head to give us, because part of Sisters Beach, the end, was part of the Circular Head municipality, so they gave that to us. And but then the track is now just in the Circular Head municipality.
You said there was a mail centre in Burnie and Ulverston. Devonport knows that for joint things. There's not one over there.
I forgot to mention Devonport. There is one there too.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Book of that, history of that. You mentioned the Postman's Track from Boat Harbour going through to the northwest coast, and that used to be delivered by a post office official, but eventually they had to be accompanied by a policeman because the mail was being robbed because of the gold rush, and people were going and robbing the mail delivery man so that they could afford to go to the gold rush.
Yeah, this is the days, but they used to carry a lot of cash, as I mentioned before, and things in the mail. Yeah.
And you talk about there being money in that collecting stamps.
Oh.
I'm a bit prone to limericks, but there once was a girl called Natalie who was completely obsessed by philately. By nuptial chance, she now lives on a ranch, which means philately, Natalie's gone all Catley.
And with that, we'll end.